Okay, welcome to another workout session for our CSEC Physics past paper number 1. And this is 2021 multiple choice workout. My name is Mr. Campbell and with me is Miss Rose. Okay, so question 1, we have from the topic of work, energy, and power. And this question asks for the definition of power. Now, we know that power is the rate at which work is done. So this means that for power, we have work done divided by time. And so the answer should be C.
Right. Second question has to do with the topic of measurement. And it says that errors due to parallax can be minimized by, and we have our options there. Now, parallax errors are those which result from viewing particular marks at incorrect angles. So in order to minimize parallax error, you would need to place the eye perpendicular to the mark that is being read. So the answer for that would be B.
Okay, number 3 says, which of the following pairs consists of fundamental quantities? And we know that fundamental quantities cannot be further divided into other quantities. So we have mass and length as fundamental quantities, also time and current. So our answer should be D.
Now the diagram shows two forces, X and Y, applied to an object. And we are asked to find the magnitude and direction of a third force, which would cause the object to remain stationary. Now, because a stationary object would have zero net or resultant force acting on it, since X and Y are parallel to each other, then the resultant force to those two would have to be based on the arithmetic sum of X and Y, but acting in the opposite direction. So that's B.
All right, for number 5, we also have a question coming from the topic of vectors. And this one shows a ring that is acted upon by 3 forces, all in the same plane. And we are asked which equation must be true in order for the ring to remain stationary. So this means that all 3 forces must be balanced. Now, whenever an object is in equilibrium and we have 2 forces acting on it at right angles, then we know that the third force must be calculated from Pythagoras' theorem. And so n squared would be equal to the sum of L squared and M squared. So this means the answer should be B.
All right. The next question also has to do with forces. And you're asked, which changes can be caused by a force acting on a body? Now we know that whenever a force acts on a body, you can have a change in shape as well as its motion. However, because density is an internal or an intrinsic property of a particular substance, then force acting on a body will not change its density. So the answer would be A, 1 and 2 only.
Okay, number 7, this is taken from the topic of hydrostatics. And we are asked, when the tap is opened, water will flow from P to Q. So which of these options will take place? Now, we know that a liquid finds its own level due to the pressure differences which may occur between two connecting vessels. So P and Q are connected by the tube, which is attached by a tap. So once these two vessels are connected, then liquid will flow until the levels are equal, because at that time the pressure at the base of the two vessels will also be equal. And so our answer is D.
So question 8 has to do with the topic of Hooke's law. We have a graph of a light spring, and it shows the extension being plotted against the force. Now we are asked to look at the three statements and identify which of them is or are true. We know that based on Hooke's law, the extension and the force are directly proportional to each other. But once the elastic limit has been exceeded, then the relationship will no longer be directly proportional. So you will not have a linear relationship between the two quantities, extension and force. So we can see that the elastic limit was exceeded. So 1 would be true and 2 would be false, because the spring did not obey Hooke's law over the entire extension. And we could calculate the force per unit extension from the quantities or the values on the graph. The force divided by the extension would be 75 divided by 10. So that would be 7.5 newtons per centimeter. So the answer is B.
Okay, for number 9, we have a question coming from work image and power. This is on kinetic energy. Kinetic energy of a body of mass m and velocity v is given by, now we know that kinetic energy is calculated from the equation that says kinetic energy is equal to half mass times velocity squared, which is the same as mv squared over 2, and therefore our answer is D.
We have a question here on dynamics. Which of the following will be constant if a constant net force is applied to a body? Now, based on Newton's first law, we know that if we have a net force that is constant, then the velocity of the object is going to remain the same. So it means that acceleration will be constant. So that's C.
Number 11, also coming from hydrostatics. This asks us for the unit, which set of units will give the SI unit of pressure. And we know that the SI unit of pressure is the Pascal, and we have to use SI unit of density, which is kilogram per cubic meter, SI unit of gravitational field strength, which is Newton per kilogram, and the SI unit of height, which is meter. So the answer should be B.
So question 12 is based on Archimedes' principle. An ice cube sinks in liquid A but floats in liquid B, and we are asked to identify which statement is true of liquid A and B. Now, for a floating object, the upthrust is equal to the weight, and if the object sinks, then it means that the weight is greater than the upthrust. So since the object is able to float in B but sinks in A, it means that the upthrust in liquid A must be less than that of liquid B. So our answer is A.
Number 13, this comes from hydrostatics as well. So the diagram shows a dam, and the question says, what is the pressure at the base of the dam? What is it dependent on? Now we know that the pressure in a liquid or fluid in general depends only on the depth of the fluid and the density. So the mass does not matter, volume of water does not matter, but the depth. So the answer is D.
Right. Now, question 14 is based on measurement, and you're asked to identify which of the following is an SI base unit, or base unit would be those from the fundamental quantities. So the base units are meter, kilogram, second, Kelvin, ampere, mole, and candela. So the only one that is there that is a base unit is ampere. So that's option C.
Question 15. This question refers to a graph which shows displacement against time. And you're asked to deduce we're asked to interpret what the graph is showing about the runner. Now we know that for a displacement time graph, the gradient gives the velocity, and since it's a straight line, it means that the gradient is constant. A constant gradient means that the velocity is also constant, and therefore the only option that matches a constant velocity would be B, going at a steady speed.
Okay. So we are back to the topic of vectors. Two forces of 8 newtons and 10 newtons cannot give a resultant of, and we know that the smallest resultant that you should be able to get from two forces would be equal to the difference between them. So the smallest resultant should be 2 newtons, and the largest resultant would be the sum, the arithmetic sum, which is 18 newtons. So the resultant of those two forces should be anywhere between 2 newtons and 18 newtons, but not less or greater than that. So the answer is A.
Number 17, a piece of string is tied onto a small stone, and the stone is then suspended, totally immersed in water. The tension in the string will be, so once an object is immersed in a fluid, it will experience an upward force, which we call the upthrust, and this upward force will make the object appear to weigh less. So therefore, the tension in the string should be less than the weight of the stone itself. And so our answer is C.
Right. So question 18 is based on the topic of work, energy, and power. We are asked to calculate the gain in gravitational potential energy of a body of weight 200 newtons as it rises from a height of 30 meters to 35 meters above the Earth's surface. Now we can calculate that by using the equation that the change in gravitational potential energy is equal to the product of the mass times the gravitational field strength times the change in height. The weight, which is 200 newtons, would be equal to the mass times the gravitational field strength. So we multiply 200 newtons by 5 meters, which would be the change in height, and that gives us 1,000 new joules. Let's see.
For number 19, this asks for the person responsible for arriving at the conclusion that measured amounts of electrical and mechanical energy can be converted to proportionate amounts of heat energy. And this will be James Joule, of course, because his experiments involve careful measurements of the amount of energy released in different situations. So our answer is D.
All right. Question 20 has to do with specific heat capacity. A metal of mass M requires energy E to raise its temperature from T1 to T2, and the specific heat capacity of the metal will be given by, and we are asked to basically use these variables that we have to write an expression for how the specific heat capacity will be calculated. Now, based on our definition for specific heat capacity, it is the energy that's required to increase the temperature of unit mass or 1 kilogram of a substance by 1 Kelvin. So therefore, C, which is specific heat capacity, would be equal to the energy divided by the product of the mass times the temperature change, which is T2 minus T1. So that is option D.
Okay, question 21 also, well, specific heat, latent heat this time. And this asks that when 0.01 kilogram of water is converted into steam, what does it do? Absorb or give out energy? Now we know that heat is absorbed when a liquid changes to a gas, and therefore we multiply the specific latent heat by the mass, which is 0.01 kilogram. That's 1/100th of a kilogram. And so our answer should be absorbs 2.26 times 10 to the fourth, since this is 1/100 of 2.26 times 10 to the sixth. So our answer is A.
Question 22 has to do with the topic of gas laws. We are given some information regarding the volume and the temperature and the pressure of a gas. And we notice that the pressure has been doubled and the volume has been halved. The only way that we can have this happening is if the temperature remains constant based on Boyle's law. So when the temperature is constant, the volume and the pressure of the gas are inversely proportional to each other. You could also go about working out the question using the general gas law, or you could use Boyle's law to work it out, but that would be basically wasting time in a sense, because you would have already seen that the pressure is doubled and the volume is halved. So it means that the temperature should be constant. So that's B.
Okay, for question 23, which of the following statements about evaporation is false? We know that evaporation can take place at all temperatures for which the substance remains a liquid. Therefore, our answer is, well, this is false. So D would be our answer, because evaporation does not only take place at room temperature.
Question 24 is related to thermal energy transfer. And we're asked, which of the following is the poorest conductor of thermal energy? Now, based on the options that we have, notice we have 3 metals. Metals are generally good conductors of heat. So air, which is gaseous, and remember, in order for conduction to take place, the particles need to be closer together. That's not the case for air. So air would be a poor conductor of thermal energy in comparison to the other 3 substances that are given. So our answer is A.
For number 25, we have some molten naphthalene at 100 degrees Celsius is allowed to cool to room temperature. If naphthalene has a melting point of 80 degrees Celsius, which of the following graphs best represents the cooling curve of naphthalene? Now, what we know is that whenever there is a phase change, and we're going to have a phase change here from liquid, because the naphthalene is heated above its melting point. So it will be a liquid at 100 degrees Celsius. But once it reaches 80 degrees Celsius, its temperature will remain constant until all of it freezes. And therefore, we should have a graph that slopes from 100 to 80 degrees Celsius and then steadies off at 80 until it finally decreases again. So the only graph that satisfies this description is C. The answer is C.
All right, we're back to transfer of thermal energy again for question 26. An electric kettle full of water is plugged into the mains. The major process by which heat travels through the water is, and we have our options there. Now, in fluids, heat is mainly transferred by convection, and that's due to the whole process of convection currents being formed, and that's used to heat up the liquid in the kettle. So our answer is B.
Number 27, which of the following are reasons why a hot liquid placed in a double-walled vacuum flask retains its heat for a long time? Now, we know that shiny surfaces are not good absorbers of radiation in terms of heat. And so option 3, would be out of it. We know that a vacuum does not allow heat transfer by conduction because for conduction to occur, there must be material medium present. So 1 and 2 are correct, but 3 is incorrect. So our answer is 1 and 2 only, that's A.
Okay. Question 28, based on the kinetic theory of matter, as the temperature of a liquid rises, and we are asked to choose what happens. Now, based on the fact that the temperature of any substance has to do with the average kinetic energy of its molecules, as temperature increases, so too does the kinetic energy of the molecules. So our answer there is B as in boy.
Number 29, a light bulb is filled with a gas at the temperature of 293 kelvins. If the initial pressure of the gas is P, what will the pressure be when the temperature increases to 360 kelvins? Now, at constant volume, we apply the pressure law, which says P over T is a constant, and we have our full equation, P1 over T1 is equal to P2 over T2. So therefore, we transpose for P2 in this equation, and that will give us 360 over 293 times P, which is the initial pressure. So that's D.
Right. Question 30 is based on the diagram that is being shown. We have some ice that is wrapped in gauze and water in a boiling tube, or a test tube, sorry. And there is a flame that is being applied close to the top of the water surface. Now you can see that the ice remains unmelted, and you're asked to explain why this occurs. Of course, this is because water is a poor conductor of heat, so it takes more heat to boil water than it does to melt the same amount of ice. And we can actually reference that by looking at the latent heat of fusion and vaporization for ice and water respectively. So it's A.
Number 31, this has to do with reflection. Which of the following diagrams illustrates the law of reflection? Now, the law of reflection says that the angle of reflection is equal to the angle of incidence, and we must measure all angles from the normal, which is the broken line in the diagram. And therefore, the best answer is A, because it shows that the two angles from the normal are the same.
Okay, now we're on to the topic of sound waves. Human ear is incapable of hearing a silent dog whistle, and this is due to the fact that humans are only able to hear sounds between the frequencies of 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, but a dog whistle actually produces sounds that has higher frequencies. So the dogs will be able to hear it, but humans cannot hear. So our answer is C.
Number 33, an echo is quieter than the original sound that produced it. This shows that compared to the original sound, the echo has a, now the loudness of a sound is a reflection of the amplitude of the waves that produce it. So quieter sounds will have lower amplitude. So if the echo is quieter, then it means that it has a lower amplitude or a small amplitude. So that's A.
Now, question 34 has to do with longitudinal waves. C and R represent compressions and rarefactions respectively. Now, we're asked what the distance between C1 and R2 would be if lambda is equal to the wavelength. So it means therefore that the distance between C1 and C2 would be one complete wavelength. So C1 to R2 would be one wavelength plus half of a wavelength, which would make our answer C.
Okay, number 35 says a ray of light leaving air enters glass of refractive index 1.6. The angle of refraction is 27 degrees. What is the sign of the angle of incidence? So the refractive index is a ratio of the sine of the angle of incidence to the sine of the angle of refraction. And in equation format, we have n is equal to sine I divided by sine r. So that means to find the sine of the angle of incidence, it would be equal to the refractive index times sine of 27. So that's 1.6 times sine of 27, which is D.
Question 36 is based on wave motion. We are given some diagrams and we're asked to select the one that best describes or represents a wave that's generated in a ripple tank by a small spherical dipper that is vibrating at constant frequency. Now, if the frequency is constant, then it means that all of the waves will be the same distance apart from each other. So the only option there is A.
Number 37, which of the following statements about waves is true? Now, reflection, refraction, and diffraction are all properties of waves. So we know that transverse waves will undergo all of those phenomena. Diffraction does not only take place with light waves. All waves undergo reflection, refraction, and diffraction. So that's true. So the answer is C.
All right, question 38 is based on the topic of electromagnetic waves. You're asked which object can detect X-rays, and we know that X-rays are ionizing, and photographic film actually has the capability to darken when it's exposed to such types of radiation, such as X-rays. So our answer is D.
Number 39, a ray of light in air strikes a glass block at an angle of incidence of 0 degrees. The light will be, now whenever the ray strikes at 0 degrees, it means that it strikes at it is in line with the normal, and so it will pass without being deviated because the angle of refraction will also be 0, and therefore the answer is A.
Number 40, the position of an image formed by a plane mirror depends on, and we are given some options there. Now, based on the properties of images formed from a plane mirror, you should be able to recall that the image distance from the mirror is equal to the object's distance from the mirror. So our answer there would be B. So the position is based on the distance of the object from the mirror.
Number 41, the refractive index of a transparent medium with a critical angle C for light traveling from the medium to air is. Now, the critical angle is angle of incidence, which results in an angle of refraction of 90 degrees. So for light going from the medium to air, we're going to have that the refractive index is the ratio of sine R to sine I, and sine R would be 90 degrees, and the critical angle is C. So our answer is C sine 90 over sine C.
All right, so we are on to electricity. This question has to do with current voltage relationships. Which of the following diagrams is a graphical representation of current versus potential difference for a metallic conductor at constant temperature? Now, a metallic conductor is one device that we call an ohmic conductor, and this is because it will obey Ohm's law. So it means that at a constant temperature, the current and the voltage will be directly proportional to each other. So the only graph that reflects this is the one that is shown in option D.
Number 43, when a polythene rod is rubbed with a cloth, it becomes. When polythene is rubbed with cloth, electrons are transferred from the cloth to the polythene. So the polythene rod will gain a negative charge. So we look for an option which says negatively charged. And it can only become negatively charged by gaining electrons, since electrons are negatively charged. So our answer should be B.
Okay. Question 44 is based on electrical quantities. We have some equations being shown and we're asked to tell which of the relationships is correct. Now we have V equals, voltage equals power times current. That is the correct form of the equation. R, which is resistance, is equal to voltage times current. That's also not correct. Q, which is charge, is equal to current times time. And based on the definition for 1 coulomb, which has to means that it's the quantity of charge that is present when you have a current of 1 ampere flowing for 1 second, this would be correct. And B is also incorrect. So our answer is C.
Number 45, this shows a diagram of a circuit where the ammeter reads 0.4 ampere and the voltmeter reads 0.6 volts. And you're asked for the resistance of R. So using Ohm's law, R equals V over I. So we simply divide 0.6, which is the voltage, by the current, which is 0.4 amperes. And we get 1.5 ohms. So our answer is B.
All right, item 46 has to do with the topic of electric charge or even electrostatic charge. 2 light aluminum spheres A and B are suspended by insulating threads. Now they come to rest as shown in the diagram, with A and B basically being repelled by each other. And you're asked to identify which force is keeping them apart. Now, because aluminum both of these spheres will have the same charge, then it means that they are going to repel each other. And this is an example of electrostatic charge or electrostatic force. So answer is C.
Number 47, which of the following current time graphs best represents a DC current? For DC current, now DC means direct current, and in direct current, the flow of charges remains in the same direction at all times, which means that the graph line does not go beyond one segment of the graph. So the only graph that shows this description is A. Graph line does not pass the x-axis to go into the other segment. That's A. All of the others would be alternating current. Answer is A.
Question 48 has to do with transformers. And we have a diagram where the primary and secondary coil are labeled. And we also have X, which is the type of input that is being used. Now we're asked to label W and X, the type of transformer that is being shown. We could identify this as a step-up transformer by looking at the number of turns in each of the coils. The primary coil, we can see here, has 3 turns, whereas the secondary coil has 4. So we have a step-up transformer. And in a transformer, the input is always an alternating current input or an AC input, so that an alternating magnetic field can be obtained. So our answer is C.
Number 49, this has to do with electronics. Now it says rectification is best done by using a. Now, rectification is the process by which alternating current is converted to direct current, and this can only be done by a diode. So our answer is D.
All right. So question 50, we have a diagram here that shows a simple AC generator, and we have a portion of the diagram that is labeled with the letter X, and we are asked to identify what X is. Now in an AC generator, those ring-like structures are slip ring as opposed to split ring commutators, which would be present in the DC motor. So our answer is slip rings, which is C.
Number 51, which of the following circuit diagrams best represents a series arrangement? Now, in a series circuit, the components are arranged so that there is only one path for the current to flow. And we can see that in A, C, and D, there are multiple paths for the current to flow. So our answer is B.
Item 52 has to do with a straight wire that is being illustrated, and it's carrying current into the plane of the paper, or in this case, into the plane of the screen. And you're asked to identify which diagram best shows the magnetic field around the wire. Now we can use the right-hand grip rule or Maxwell's corkscrew rule to determine the direction of the magnetic field around the current carrying conductor. So if we use the right-hand grip rule, which tends to be a bit more, well, it's easier for students to draw on, the thumb will point in the direction of the current. So your thumb would point into the screen, and then the fingers, and that's for the right hand, of course, your fingers will coil or turn in the direction of the magnetic field. So if the thumb points into the screen, then the fingers would curl in a clockwise direction. So the only answer that corresponds to this is option D.
Number 53, which of the following symbols represents the AND gate? And you can remember the AND gate because it resembles the uppercase letter D. So the option is B. We can see where D also, option D has a diagram or a symbol that looks like the letter D, but it has the circle at the tip. So that would represent the NAND gate. So the AND gate is without the circle at the top. The answer is B.
All right, we're back to electromagnetism again. Which material is most suitable for the core of an electromagnet? Now, when we have electromagnets being constructed, we try to use magnetically soft materials. And one of the more popular types of materials that is magnetically soft is iron. So we use a soft iron core for an electromagnet in most cases. So that's D.
Number 55 refers to the following diagram of a portion of the periodic table. In the diagram above, element F has 9 protons. How many protons does element B have? All right, so if we count back from F, you see that O should have 8, N should have 7, C should have 6, and B should have 5. So our answer is A. So going from left to right in the period, the number of protons increase by 1 every successive element.
All right. Question 56, we are shown the chemical symbol for a particular nuclide that has a mass number of 222 and an atomic number of 86, and you're asked to find the number of neutrons. Now the mass number, 222, is also known as the nucleon number because it gives the total number of protons and neutrons that are present. And 86 will tell you how many protons are present. So we can determine the number of neutrons by subtracting the atomic number from the mass number, which would give us 136 neutrons. That's C.
Number 57, which of the following cannot be deflected by a magnetic field? We have alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays, and electrons. Now, what we know is that gamma rays, because they have no charge, they are actually electromagnetic radiation. No charge, they would be undeviated by a magnetic field, also by an electric field. So the answer would be gamma rays, and so that is C. Alpha particles are positively charged, beta particles and electrons are negatively charged. So they are affected by magnetic fields and electric fields.
Okay, now sodium 24 decays into magnesium 24 with the emission of a beta particle, and we have a partial equation here that is representing the information above. Now, which of the options should be placed in the box to complete the equation? Now, whenever we have any type of chemical or nuclear equation, it needs to be balanced in terms of mass as well as charge. So we can see that the mass number needs to remain 0, but the atomic number needs to be -1, so that when we add the 12 to it, we get 11, which is what we get at the end. Now, the only species that corresponds to that is the beta particle, which is a high-speed electron. So the mass of the particle, that particular particle is 0, and it has an atomic number or proton number of -1 because the charge is negative. So our answer should be B. Okay.
Number 59, which of the following scientists discovered radium? Now we know that Isaac Newton did not work with radioactive material. Radium is a highly radioactive element. And neither did Einstein. Einstein was a theoretical physicist. J.J. Thomson discovered the electron, not any element. So our answer is Marie Curie. Both her and her husband, Pierre, discovered radium in the early 1900s. So that's A. And now to our last question for the day.
All right. Finally, we have a radioactive isotope which has a half-life of 20 days. And we're asked how many days it will take for a given sample to have its activity reduced to 1/8 of its initial value. Now, that 20 days is telling us that every time 20 days pass, half of whatever substance was there before is going to decay. So the half-life has to do with the time taken for half of the nuclei or the activity of a particular sample to decay. So if the fraction that remains is 1/8 of the original or the initial value, it means that 3 half-lives would have passed. So after the first half-life, you would have half of the sample. The second half-life, you would have half of that initial half, which is a quarter. And then the third half-life would be half of the quarter, which is 1/8. So it means that 3 half-lives would have passed. And if 1 half-life is 20 days, then 3 half-lives would be 60 days. So our answer is B.
Okay, so that's it. I hope you all learned some information here and are prepared enough for your exams. Please remember that if you need tutoring services in the science area, you can check out our website. And our website is onlinesciencetutor.net. You should also subscribe to the channel for further videos. We have an Instagram page, Online Science Tutor, and a Facebook page at CSEC Science Tutor 1. Thank you all.
Good luck.